Hi, my name's Lucy. I'm doing my thesis on pedestrian accidents in Rome. Last time I told you about how I obtained that data. I now have 116 CSV files that I want to stick together so that I can have just one big file that I can then clean up and analyse. The very first thing I did was imported a few libraries that I thought I was going to need. I made a list of all of the CSV files and I just asked it to look in this folder where I had put all of the files. Now before I tried to stick all the files together, I just wanted to make sure that all of them had the same number of columns. I opened the file in Excel, counted the columns, there were 37. When I wrote this code to just check through all of the files, some of these files had 38 columns. So that's a problem for sticking the data sets together. My next job was to look at a file and try and understand what's going on. Where is this extra column coming from? Is it in the middle, at the end, at the beginning? And here is just a couple of lines from one of the files. Here I've transposed the data so that the column names are here on the left, and then here we have the first row of index 0, and then on the right we have the second row of index 1. And so here are our 37 columns, beginning with protocollo and then going down. And kind of everything looks okay, everything looks like it's in the right column, longitude and latitude are in the correct place. Except I've got this extra column at the end called unnamed 37. It seems to be blank, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to lose any data. Then I asked my code to have a look through, see if it could find this unnamed 37 column and find anywhere where there was some data in that column and what row was that data on, so that I could just pinpoint where the problem is. And in this 2015 October file, I found rows 132 and 133, and I found one row in the June file of 2022. Now, these values in Explorer, they seem to refer to what should be in the column just before, which is airbag. So did the airbag explode or not in the collision? It seems like some of the data might have been shifted over by one column. I needed to make sure kind of how big this problem was and get rid of it before I try and stick these files together. Having a look in Excel and just kind of having a look at those rows that have been identified, I saw that the problem seemed to begin at natura incidente, type of accident. So I tried to get a list of what are all of the unique values that are in the type of accident column. And this is what came out. At the end you'll see vehicle moving against a stopped vehicle, vehicle moving against vehicle that's parked, coming back. You'll notice also all of these have a capital letter, but if we go all the way back to the beginning of the list, there are two things in this list that shouldn't be there. They are to do with where the accident happened, not what type of accident it was. If we cut off the first two values of this list, then we have a clean list of what are the types of accident. Carrying on, I wanted to do the same thing for the column next to it, which was particolarità strade, so what are the particulars of the road, what are the features of the road. Doing the same thing, I ended up with this list. There are 23 items in this list, but looking through this list very carefully, I found that in this list, somewhere, here we are, there was a scontro frontale and a scontro laterale in this list. After that, everything is okay because it's to do with features of the road, but these two items should not be here because they are types of accident, not to do with the type of road. Here I wrote some code to kind of compare the two lists, make sure that I used a set to make sure there were no duplicates, and I ended up with a clean list of road features as well. So now I have my clean list of types of accident and clean list of road features. That road features now has 21 items in it rather than 23. I wanted to figure out then, using these two rows which were kind of not that far through into the database, because I've seen that there's a problem at the end of the column, so on the 38th column, but this is kind of round about the 10th column, and I wanted to see, if I'm looking in the middle of the database rather than at the end of the database, how many rows are actually being affected. So far I've got 2 rows in the 2015 file and 1 row in one of the 2022 files, but is that really all that's going wrong? I have this code that double checks the type of accident and the type of road columns to make sure nothing has ended up in the wrong column. And in fact, this time I ended up with, yes, the 2 rows that were in the 2015 file, so it seems like those 2 rows are the only ones that are our problem. But in the 2022 file, I actually ended up with these 7 rows, which are to do with the type of accident, not the type of road. So the problem is actually bigger than I thought it was. We're at a good point because we now have the name of the file, where the rows are not aligned with the proper column headers, and the rows where the problem is happening. But, so I just thought, okay, shift them back. But I didn't want to shift them back and lose data in the column that I moved them into. So I wanted to also double check kind of about 20 columns in at what type of traffic there is, what kind of visibility there is. Is there a problem there with things ending up in the wrong columns? Is everything being shifted over by 1, or is it sometimes 2 columns? What actually is happening? And luckily I got the confirmation that yes, it seems to be the entire row just moving over, and it's those 2 rows in the first file and 7 rows in the second file. So that made me feel a bit more confident about moving on. Looking at the index 8 and index 9 columns. In index 9, there was actually some values in that first file. So if I just moved everything to the left from type of accident into that column, I'd lose some information. But as there is a null value in index 8 column, then that is where I'm going to move everything into. So that allowed me to be very specific about where to move those things. So I moved those values. Rechecking the file, just checking those few columns. Now everything looks like it's in the right place. I only wrote over some null values, so no problem there. Checking the end of that row, everything also now seems to be in the correct place. I've got this kind of, still got that unnamed column at the end, and it's still got some values in it, but because that data has now also been moved into the column before, then I can just cut off that last column and not worry about it not being empty. Then I had to repeat the whole process for the 2022 file, where I had 7 rows. Once again, I had the problem that just moving type of accident to the left was going to lose me some information, but looking back in the column before, in the kilometrica column, there's nothing in there, so I could just move everything back, but kind of starting here from the da specificare column rather than starting here from the natura incidente column. So moving those values, I don't know why that's not showing up, but it did all of that. Checking, now natura incidente, type of incidente, everything is in the correct place. And looking at the last few columns, again, I've conserved that data about the airbag, and the last column is still there, but it hasn't got anything that I don't have in a different column. So now I can just cut that last column off, because now I'm sure it's got nothing that I need in it. So I wrote this code to scroll through all of the files and get rid of that last column. Most of my files, it didn't have a problem, but for those last files, it did. I can just scroll here and show you. Here we are. Here's that 2015 file where it cut it out. No problem, no problem. And then here we are from 2018 June onwards, there was that extra column. So now finally all of the files have the same columns and same number of columns. Yay! Next. Okay, so next, just looking at one of the files, the first file, I got what all of the types were, because I wanted to make sure that the types were going to be okay before I stuck everything together. And the only problems that I found was the progressivo it's a numbering which, if there's there's a pedestrian in the accident, they don't get a number. If there are vehicles, the vehicles get a number 1, 2, 3, 4, however many vehicles are involved, but everybody in one vehicle will be given the same number. So you might have the driver of vehicle 1, the passenger of vehicle 1, another passenger of vehicle 1, and then driver of vehicle 2, driver of vehicle 3, passenger of vehicle 3, and so on. Now, those numbers should always be integers. It's showing up as a float, so I would like to sort that out. And another thing is that there are limited values in a lot of these columns, as you saw, for the type of accident and for the type of road. And so I wanted to make sure that my file was storing everything efficiently, but also because I'm going to end up with quite a lot of data. I've got about 7,000-ish rows in each file, 116 files, and so I think I end up with 680-odd thousand rows of data at the end. So I would like it to be stored as efficiently as possible. If I use category rather than object, where I have a limited number of unique values, and by limited, I think it's meant to be up to about 50, then it's better to use a category rather than object. Here I'm doing a little test to see whether it would be a good idea to use a category or not. So you'll see, for example, for the date and time of the accident, there are 1,052 unique times, because those times are spread all the way through lots of different times of day on lots of different days through 10 years. So that is something where we're going to leave it as an object. Instead, if we look at localizzazione 1, that was to do with the kind of road. Is it on an urban road? Is it on a motorway? There are 9 different types, so therefore it's going to be better to use category. I made a list of what I want to stay as an object. Now the date and time, I'm going to deal with that later once everything is all stuck together. The strada, una, all of that stuff is to do with where the accident happened, and it's strings, so I'm just leaving that as it is because it might be quite different for each accident. But the categories are all of these. These are things that can be lumped together because, you know, type of person, it's either a pedestrian or a driver or a passenger generally. All of these have limited options, and hence category is better. We've got a number of columns where integers are used, and then longitude and latitude, a float is used. I then ended up with my D-type dictionary. So this is where for each column, I put in what type it should be. And I made a list called columns categories, which lists all of those columns which should be categories. Now, my file, because I don't want to keep saving as a CSV, because when I do, I lose all my types, I'm going to save this as a Parquet file, which means I need to do this install of PyArrow. And I made an empty list, and my output file is going to be this merged data Parquet file. It went through my list of files, reading the CSV file one by one, those 116 files. The types are kind of sorted out here. And it did actually take quite a while for this code to work. What worked eventually was getting all of the types to be the string. I did want to use my D-type dictionary, but it wasn't happy about that at all. So that's a little change I had to make towards the end to get this to work. It then did this concatenation of all of the data frames, stuck them together into this output file, and then made me a little file about what it had done, how many data frames it had stuck together, how many columns, files, and everything. At the end of the day, I ended up with my Parquet file with 685,881 rows and 37 columns. Now I am starting to understand why they're saying that data science is 80% data cleaning and 20% models and data analysis and stuff. I hope that you will join me in my next video when I will tell you about data cleaning. Until then, bye.